Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi was born on the world of Stugin, and was the last Padawan of the infamous Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. A hero of the Naboo crisis, Kenobi was elevated to the rank of Jedi Knight after Jinn's death. In accordance with his master's dying wish, Kenobi took the former slave, Anakin Skywalker, as his Padawan, and trained him in the ways of the Jedi. A notable field agent of the Jedi Order, Kenobi was sent to the world of Kamino to investigate the assassination attempts on Senator Amidala. The investigation led to Kenobi discovering a plot by Count Dooku to instigate a galaxy-wide conflict between the Republic and the newly formed Confederacy of Independent Systems. One of the few survivors of the Battle of Geonosis, Kenobi would become one of 10 Jedi High Generals when the Order was thrust into military service during the Clone Wars. He would go on to lead Republic forces to victory at such notable battlefronts of Moonlist and Utapau, among others, and would defeat the most infamous Jedi killers of his day, such as Dirge, Asajj Ventress, Savage Opress, and General Grievous. His prowess in the battle, coupled with his diplomatic skill, would earn him a seat on the Jedi Council, though his time on it would be cut short by the end of the Clone Wars and the subsequent betrayal of his troops as a result of Order 66. Kenobi would survive the beginning of the Great Jedi Purge, and would challenge Anakin Skywalker, now the newly appointed Sith apprentice Darth Vader, waging a titanic lightsaber battle that would end in Kenobi defeating his former Padawan and leaving him to die on the edge of a lava river on the planet Mustafar. Kenobi would then go into exile on Tatooine, where he would watch over the childhood of Vader's son Luke Skywalker, living under the assumed name Ben. Kenobi would come out of exile to aid the Rebel Alliance in the fight against the Empire, sacrificing himself in order to let Luke and his companions escape the Death Star. Kenobi would go on to transcend the physical plane as a Force spirit, and would return periodically to guide Luke in his training to become a Jedi Knight. Darth Vader, formerly the famed Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, was the Sith apprentice to Darth Sidious. The greatest Jedi killer in history, Vader would lead Operation Nightfall and would personally slay several Jedi Masters during its conduction. Vader would then butcher the Separatist Council on Mustafar before being confronted by his old master Obi-Wan Kenobi. After their lengthy duel, he would be soundly defeated, losing all his limbs and being burned alive. Contrary to his master's initial belief, Vader survived his injuries, though not without an extensive cybernetic refit in order to keep him alive. While his cybernetics initially hampered him, Vader would adapt quickly, making what he had work, becoming the enforcer to the newly formed Galactic Empire. He would then lead the Jedi Purge, killing every Jedi he came across until he was finally beaten at the hands of Luke Skywalker. However, Skywalker spared his life, rejecting the dark side of the Force and proclaiming himself a Jedi Knight. Vader would then follow suit, turning his back on the dark side and killing Sidious, resulting in his conversion to the light side and the death of Darth Vader. Hello YouTube, this is the Phoenix Exalt bringing you my first ever Versus video. For this analysis, I will be using Kenobi during the time frame of Revenge of the Sith, and Darth Vader from the timeline of the original trilogy. I will be pulling from Legends continuity along with any canon materials that do not directly interfere with previously made Legends materials. Due to the fact that the Disney Story Group, also known as K-Canon, is going in a direction that is neither original nor creative, I will not be using canon as the main point of Star Wars media for my videos, though I am quite willing to use characters that do not overwrite previous ones, such as Ahsoka Tano, as I quite like these characters and they only add to the universe and do not detract in almost any way. With that out of the way, I present to you Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Vader. If these titans met on the battlefield, who would be the victor? Obi-Wan Kenobi was a human male in his mid to late 30s and was still well into his physical prime by the time of the movies. Slim but muscular, he possessed extremely high levels of agility, speed, and stamina, capable of fighting hours on end with little to no rest. While he was not a muscular powerhouse, his strength was considerable. Kenobi's almost inhuman durability should also be taken into account. While Kenobi's capacity for taking physical pain might not be on the level of brute muscle tanks such as Darth Malgus or Savage Opress, it was easily comparable to the likes of Shaak-Ti and Anakin Skywalker. He has survived being impaled with shards of glass, shot, burned with a lightsaber, blown up, gassed, crushed, and has even fought his way through over 30 armed guards and the Dark Jedi Asajj Ventress directly following months of agonizing Sith torture, which consisted of him being deprived of food and water, while being forced to wear a mask that dulls his senses and prevented him from calling on the Force to sustain himself, along with having maggots feasting on his innards. In short, Kenobi is not going down easily. It's a death blow or nothing. Darth Vader was a 45-year-old human male at the time of his death, and while his original physical capabilities were those of a typical Jedi Knight, as a Sith Lord this was no longer the case. His extensive cybernetic refit left him more machine than man. Most of his internal organs were replaced with cybernetic implants. All of his limbs were prosthetic and required a respirator to breathe. Due to the severity of his injuries, the reconstruction was rushed, resulting in the cybernetics being both cumbersome and poorly made. The cybernetics decreased his agility, and the top-heavy nature of his armor threw off his balance. However, Vader quickly adapted to his new body, completely retooling his fighting technique to make all of his disabilities overwhelming advantages. While his impeded agility would forever remain a weakness despite his efforts to compensate, the advantages offered by his armor would more than make up for the fact. Vader's strength was superhuman, being able to lift and throw a fully grown human with casual ease, and even being able to punch through solid steel with apparently little effort. Additionally, the constant dose of painkillers and other drugs gave him an almost unlimited endurance, allowing him to fight in high-intensity lightsaber duels for hours on end without noticeable difficulty. The armor also protected him from injury and other forms of attack. Vader has been stabbed, shot, torched with a flamethrower, survived light hits from a lightsaber, buried alive, exposure to hard vacuum, and even withstood immediate proximity to a grenade literally exploding in his face. The armor also allowed him to stave off the premature aging brought on by deep immersion in the dark side of the Force, save for occasional sporting of yellow Sith eyes. However, Vader's armor was not without its limitations. Significant blunt force could cause the armored platings to shatter, and a committed strike from a lightsaber would cut through it as easily as anything else. Additionally, Vader's suit was extremely sensitive to electrical discharges. Low-level bursts could cause the armor to seize up, and high-intensity maelstroms could cause these systems to fail outright. While redundant systems built into the armor allowed him to breathe unassisted for a short amount of time, once they failed, he suffocated. I don't believe this section's verdict is difficult to call, though of course I will go into some detail. While it is true that Kenobi is in prime physical condition and can withstand an inhuman amount of punishment, he simply cannot stand up to the overwhelming physical might that Vader can bring to bear. While it is true that Obi-Wan is significantly more agile than Vader, this is not a significant advantage, as Vader has dealt with agile speed fencers in the past. Darth Vader gets the physical edge. Now we move on to martial arts and lightsaber combat. As a Jedi apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi was one of the most gifted students of his generation and a natural talent with the lightsaber. Taking full advantage of this natural aptitude, he developed into one of the greatest swords masters in galactic history and was proclaimed by Jedi Master Mace Windu as the greatest master of Form 3 Sarisu of the era. The third form to be developed, Sarisu, was constructed in response to the widespread usage of energy-based weapons that rendered the forms of Makashi and Shi-Cho obsolete. It was built around tight, efficient movements intended to provide maximum defense viability and combative longevity. Although it was originally intended solely for defense against blaster-wielding opponents, Sarisu was eventually taken to the point where it was regarded that true masters of the form were invincible to all combatants. Accordingly, Kenobi's technique was based around the core tenets of Sarisu, taken to the nth degree. He would use quick and precise movements and parries in order to dodge or block incoming attacks. In keeping with his form, Kenobi was a master of blast deflection, unparalleled within his era. He has been described as walking through hornet swarms of blaster fire unscathed, and has even deflected a cannon shot from a vulture droid, a feat many Jedi regarded as impossible. As noted in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, Kenobi's defense was great enough to effectively stonewall the era's reigning masters of Makashi and Djem So, as well as block up to 20 strikes per second, with nothing but the Force to guide his blade during his final duel with General Grievous. While it is true that Kenobi has been quoted saying that Sarisu is the only form of which he feels proficient in, this is almost certainly an act of self-effacement. In his youth, Kenobi studied Ataru, no doubt at the direction of his master Qui-Gon Jinn, a noted master of the form. Kenobi would become a seasoned master of Ataru. His offense was quite varied, executing smooth transitions between power blows, sweeps, and precise cuts. He was also able to combine the tenets of both Sarisu and Ataru. This was especially impressive because he was able to answer both weaknesses of the forms, Sarisu's being a lack of offensive viability and Ataru's lack of defensive viability. Kenobi also possessed a lethal proficiency with unarmed combat, flawlessly integrating physical strikes from the alternative martial art taijutsu into his routine. Learning from his mistakes on Geonosis, he incorporated the tenets from multiple fighting forms in order to diversify his skill set. Studying the forms of Shi-Cho, Shi-En, Ni-Man, and Jar-Kai dual-blade fencing, and keeping with the focus of Shi-Cho, Kenobi was devastating in battlefield engagements. While it is true that Count Dooku is quoted saying that his application of Shi-Cho was clumsy and unrefined, it was later revealed that Kenobi was deliberately using basic Shi-Cho and Ataru attacks as ploys to lure Dooku into a false sense of security, and as such, I believe that his application goes well beyond this assessment. Form 5 Shi-En was based around aim deflection on the battlefield, and on multiple occasions Kenobi has been seen employing Shi-En's reverse grip. As stated in the Jedi Path, Kenobi studied Ni-Man with the expressed intent of integrating force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, a skill he would use great effect during the Clone Wars. Jar-Kai was definitely the least developed of Kenobi's skills, though his absolute mastery of it was shown when he single-handedly took on both Darth Maul and Savage Opress in combat and soundly defeated both. An active field agent and an acclaimed military general, Kenobi was regarded as one of the best strategic minds of his day, distinguished by his calm and calculating approach and his reliance on deception and surprise tactics. He would apply these skills to combat effortlessly. He would be able to focus on the needs of the moment while maintaining a broad situational awareness, keeping opponents at arm's length with his impenetrable defense, and waiting until his opponent overextended himself, following up with a quick, precise, and lethal counter. Kenobi was also fond of using the environment to his advantage, controlling the fight to give himself the home field advantage. In a fight against an opponent he had either not dueled for many years, in the case of Count Dooku, or an opponent he had never faced before and had no knowledge of their preferred fighting style, he would begin with a basic and clumsy applications of Shicho and Ataru to lure his opponent into a false sense of security. Then, when he had sussed out his opponent's technique, or was forced on his back foot, he would begin to start using Sarisu's, gradually shifting more and more into his preferred form. He would then wait for an opening of which he would exploit with either a quick slash of the blade or an integration of a telekinetic strike followed up with a slash of his blade cutting down his opponent. Kenobi is in my estimate how one should handle themselves in combat. Instead of becoming a jack-of-all-trades, master of none, Kenobi mastered a specific set of skills that allow him to answer almost any scenario or combatant he may come across. Anakin Skywalker was a natural talent with the lightsaber, becoming the reigning master of the Gem-So for his era, proving his mastery by defeating the fallen Jedi turned Sith Lord Count Dooku, who was noted for being the finest duelist in the history of the Jedi Order. With his fall to the dark side and defection to the Sith, these skills would be turned against his former comrades, becoming possibly the greatest Jedi killer in the galactic history. Additionally, since almost all of Emperor Palpatine's dark acolytes in Emperor's hands trained under Vader, he had a significant impact on lightsaber dueling during the Dark Times, which was regarded as the heyday for Forms 5 to Gem-So. Form 5 was developed to answer the perceived weakness of a lack of offensive for Form 3 Sarisu, and was built around the tactic of following defensive maneuvers with immediate counters, retaliating against the opponent instead of passively responding to their attacks. In layman's terms, peace through superior firepower. The Xi'an variant was geared towards aim deflection, and Gem-So through lightsaber dueling. Anakin Skywalker mastered both, and this skill transferred to Vader. Learning from his mistakes on Mustafar, Vader did not become a grossly over-specialized Form 5 combatant like Anakin, and instead incorporated elements from all 7 forms into his technique, using the Gem-So as the backbone for a highly advanced hybrid fighting technique. Vader's technique was also built around defending his vulnerable respirator. He would define his footwork in order to increase his mobility, but also turned his own mobility into an asset. While strength is a major part of his technique, Vader is not some brute with an axe a la Savage Opress, and on more than one occasion has demonstrated that he is perfectly capable of incredibly precise attacks, no doubt using elements of Form 2 Makashi. His technique being noted as crisp and precise by Oli Starstone on Kashyyyk. Vader has also become adept with discerning lightsaber forms, so much so that he no longer relied on familiarity with forms, and simply knew each and every move one could use with a form, and could recognize and size up an opponent in an instant. Vader primarily developed this skill due to the fact that most Jedi were completely slaves to their preferred fighting forms. Thus, any form, even a combination of forms, became a predictable one. This meant that a notable duelist for a swordsman like Count Dooku, Darth Vader, and Yoda to attack Vader solely through lightsaber combat would be practically suicide. While I'm not saying that Vader would beat them in a fight, I am saying that the fact that they rely solely on the forms of lightsaber combat to fight and not creating their own leaves them dangerously exposed to Vader's expertise. Though this reliance on sussing out his opponent's technique gave Vader a massive advantage against almost all opposing swordsmen, this left a huge disadvantage against duelists who had a highly randomized fighting style, with the only consistency in their fighting style was the lack of it. This is why duelists such as Exar Kun, Chaos and Drat, and Rowan Shrine stand a much better chance against Vader than most other swordsmen in the galaxy. All in all, Vader was a highly skilled combatant who could reliably defeat almost all the combatants in his era through preparation and knowledge, but against the few he couldn't prepare for, he was helpless to stop them. This is a difficult and complicated verdict to call, but I will of course do my best to explain it in a comprehensive manner. Kenobi and Vader are both masters at lightsaber dueling, and their different fighting styles are perfectly suited for their mentalities. In one corner, Kenobi's unparalleled mastery of Surisu makes him nearly invincible, but on the other hand, Darth Vader's personalized technique is perfectly optimized for capitalizing on his armor's strengths, along with compensating for its shortcomings. Though this is very tough, I ultimately find myself giving the edge to Kenobi, if only slightly, due to the fact that he would be able to overcome Vader not through the use of pure martial skill, but through trickery. In a pure lightsaber duel with no force abilities between the two, I see Vader opening up with Djem So, and Kenobi with Shi-Cho and Ataru. Kenobi would be able to easily suss out Vader's technique due to his innate familiarity with the form. Vader, while certainly not stupid, was prone to sometimes underestimate his opponent, and seeing the clumsy moves Kenobi would open with, would probably assume he was of little skill, and therefore required a little effort to kill. He would then probably switch to Juyo, the seventh form of lightsaber combat and the most aggressive of the forms. While Masters of Juyo were said to be able to pierce even Surisu's defenses, Masters of Juyo had no defensive viability at all, and as such, Kenobi would then wait until Vader overextended himself and cut Vader down. Thus, Kenobi gets the slight edge, and I must stress the slight edge, in martial arts and lightsaber dueling. Obi-Wan Kenobi was one of 4 long-term members of the Jedi Council, and as such was a legendary wielder of the light side of the Force. Numerous sources have credited Kenobi as being a wise and powerful Jedi Master, said to have an understanding of the Force only surpassed by Master Windu and Grand Master Yoda. As a Jedi Guardian, Kenobi was generally a combat specialist and a field agent. In keeping with this, most of his Force abilities centered around boosting his combat performance. Physical augmentation was his bread and butter, elevating his already considerable speed, strength, agility, reflexes, and stamina to superhuman levels, common to all Jedi. Obi-Wan Kenobi was highly advanced and a powerful telekinetic, ranging from blunt but powerful blows to subtle and inventive. One of his most impressive displays of telekinesis was during a mission to Felucia. While en route to the planet, his shuttle was sent into a free fall. In order to prevent his death, Kenobi unleashed a force wave that uprooted several large trees, each larger than the shuttle itself, and then proceeded to carefully place the trees into position to break the shuttle's fall. This accomplishment was made all the more impressive by the fact that he was standing outside on the ship's hull, and therefore devoting most of his attention to simply staying in place on the hull. His most destructive ability was the Force Repulse, a gathered burst of force energy that would send targets flying in all directions. Notably, Kenobi used this ability to defeat the known Jedi killer Dirge, blasting apart his body with such force that he liquefied most of Dirge's muscle mass that made up his body. Kenobi was also highly skilled with force throws, able to lift heavy objects and throw them with pinpoint accuracy at a desired target. Similarly, Kenobi was also a master of the saber throw, using telekinesis to manipulate his lightsaber mid-flight and take out multiple targets at once. While certainly not weak in grand-scale manipulation, Kenobi favored using subtle uses of the Force to off-balance and expose his enemies. The greatest example of this would be when he used the Force to reverse the polarity of Anakin Skywalker's mechanical hand during their duel on Mustafar. Kenobi has also proven on multiple occasions that he can reliably penetrate the telekinetic defenses of opposing Force wielders, and though his passive Force shield strength is spotty at best, his active defense can block strikes from even the likes of Count Dooku and Darth Vader, and he's capable of using shields to defend himself from projectiles. Obi-Wan's strong connection to the living Force allowed him to develop into an advanced telepath. He was an expert at both the Jedi mind trick and the beast control ability. Additionally, the Clone Wars role-playing game handbook credits him with an immunity to fear effects and mental intrusions. Although lacking any offensive-based energy attacks, Kenobi had some skill with Tuda Menace, able to block multiple blaster shots with ease, though more advanced applications seemed to elude him. Finally, Kenobi was capable of the rare art of sound mimicry. The power allowed the user to imitate any sound that they had previously heard. While not lethal, it is easy to see how this ability could lead to an advantage for the user. Kenobi is most famous for his ability to transcend the physical plane as a Force spirit, surviving his death and retaining his individuality as an entity of the light side. While this ability has no known combative powers, it does speak volumes to his connection with the Force. At the end of the day, Obi-Wan Kenobi was a tactical and inventive Force wielder, the quintessential Jedi. Darth Vader's development as a combative Force wielder is similar to Ludwig von Beethoven's development as a composer after losing his hearing. Anakin Skywalker had the potential to become the most powerful Force wielder in galactic history. However, due to his preference for lightsaber dueling over his Force abilities, this potential was never even close to realized. Additionally, his injuries on Mustafar, and due to the fact that the Force is channeled to living tissue, his potential was crippled. Despite this, Vader made what he had work, becoming one of the most powerful Force wielders of his era. Vader's application of physical augmentation was mainly focused on compensating for the deficiencies of his armor, elevating his speed and agility to make him even more mobile, and on more than one occasion has been described as moving faster than the eye could perceive. While his cybernetic limbs already possessed enough strength to break bones and crush the hilts of lightsaber blades, when he boosted his strength with the Force, he was capable of ripping large doors off of spacecraft. Darth Vader was also an expert at telekinesis, using this power frequently and with little to no effort. He would use pushes and pulls to manhandle targets and would also be a master of the saber throw, telekinetically moving his lightsaber to hit one or multiple targets with ease, along with using loose objects to pummel his adversaries into submission. Vader also mastered the Force repulse ability, gathering the Force within himself and releasing it in all directions. While grand-scale manipulations were not his typical MO, Vader was more than capable of performing them. He has been observed lifting and crushing AT-AT walkers with telekinesis, destroying armies with devastating Force waves, and has even forced two large freighters to collide with one another. One of Vader's best-known usage of the Force was Force-based strangulation, crushing the throats of one or multiple targets, and on one occasion crushing the heart of a Jedi. Though a clear emphasis was placed on brute force, Vader was also adept at using precision-based manipulations to undermine his adversaries and assert his control over the fight, and on numerous occasions has successfully penetrated the barriers of opposing Force wielders. Vader's own barriers were also proven to be effective against all but the most powerful of assailants. Vader was also a highly skilled telepath, performing the basic mind trick, beast control ability, and even probing the minds of other trained Force wielders. The most notable example of this is when he successfully probed the mind of Luke Skywalker and learned of the existence of his sister Leia. When under the influence of extreme rage, Vader was capable of surviving otherwise fatal injuries, essentially willing himself to continue living. It was the use of this power that allowed him to survive Mustafar and being buried alive during the invasion of the Atuan system, surviving for days with all of his life support systems rendered inoperable. When questioned by Palpatine on how he managed to survive, his response was, "The dark side gave me all I needed." While this is a very impressive power, Vader was only able to consciously control it for 10 minutes at a time, and otherwise would only be used during extremely circumstantial moments. Vader's biggest weakness was his inability to conjure Force Lightning. Due to the fact that Force Lightning can only be cast by a flesh and blood hand, Vader was incapable of generating any form of it. Additionally, Vader was also adept at the 2 Menace ability, being able to deflect blaster bolts with ease, though Force Lightning was beyond his reach for obvious reasons. While Vader did not possess a huge bag of abilities to use in combat, the abilities he did have at his disposal were best described with one word: devastating. Obi-Wan Kenobi wielded a standard Jedi lightsaber for his day, with a blue Ilum crystal for the focusing lens. Other than familiarity with his own handiwork, provided no special benefit. Darth Vader wielded a lightsaber of similar design to his previous lightsaber as a Jedi. Originally, it contained a red synthetic crystal as a focusing lens, though he later swapped it out with a rare red-hued Adegan crystal. Vader's lightsaber also possessed a dual phase function. This allowed him to immediately change the blade lengths to preset lengths. This verdict is easy to call. The dual phase function of Vader's weapon provides more options than Kenobi's regular lightsaber. As such, while I must stretch that this is called into question, as Kenobi has dealt with this type of lightsaber before in Dooku, the advantage is still there. Darth Vader gets the edge in weaponry. And now, the verdict. I originally decided on this matchup because of a request, and only recently did I truly begin to appreciate just how powerful these two combatants are. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place on the rebel base on Yavin 4, with several loose objects for the combatants to use. Additionally, let us assume that for the purpose of this fight, neither combatant recognizes the other, as the two meeting would cause the combatants to behave much more differently than normal, and as such would not be an even playing field. As a final tally for this matchup, I see the victor winning 6 times out of 10. This will be a scenario of 1 majority victory. Let us begin. Kenobi hid in the shadows as he watched the shuttle land. He sensed approximately 6 beings inside the shuttle. 1 pilot, 1 co-pilot, 1 slightly snobby, weak-minded presence, an officer no doubt, 2 presences that felt full of duty and commitment stormtroopers, he decided. And finally, a dark presence, but yet it was somehow different. It was not primal like Maul or Oppress. It was not filled with a barely contained fury like Ventress. It was more filled with a sense of order to it, almost as Dooku, but lacked the refined edge and the sense that he was above it all that Dooku seemed to express. A Sith Lord, he deduced, and a powerful one at that. All of these thoughts flashed through Kenobi's head in a split second. No matter, thought Kenobi, he would deal with the Sith after his henchmen. The boarding ramp opened with a hiss, and a sharp breathing filled the air. A tall, dark-armored figure walked down with Imperial Moff at his side, along with 2 stormtroopers behind them. Kenobi quickly listened in on the conversation. "Lord Vader," said the Moff, "we have arrived at the site you requested, but there seems to be little activity." "That's because you have landed too close and warned our prey," Vader replied. "Troopers," yelled Moff, "bring me the life form sensor." The two troopers went back inside the shuttle, and as the door shut, Kenobi pressed a button to his right and activated the trap beneath the shuttle pad. The shuttle, the Moff, and Vader were enveloped in a harsh orange light as the explosives incinerated anything nearby for tens of yards. Well, almost everything. Kenobi watched in disbelief as Vader walked out of the fireball unscathed. Realizing that the Sith would require a more assertive approach, he calmly dropped his Jedi robes and walked down the slope to meet the Sith Lord. "So you show yourself at last," Vader said as he watched the Jedi Master walk down the hill. This Jedi was wearing face camouflage, and as such he could not discern his true identity. No matter, he would take his measure, then his lightsaber, then his head. Kenobi calmly activated his lightsaber, opting for an Ataru stance. Vader recognized this immediately and opted for the Gem-So stance. In this early fight, Kenobi would be able to glean more from Vader than the other way around, as Kenobi would be fighting purposefully in clumsy maneuvers that Vader would believe, while Kenobi would easily be able to suss out the Gem-So. However, I do favor Vader in the early fight, who might decide to commit to a Makashishal attack, or choose to simply overwhelm Kenobi with force-based attacks. I do not believe that the fight would end so early, though, as both opponents would only be testing each other and sussing out each other's technique. The two combatants stared each other down, waiting for the first move to be made. Vader would be first, charging at Kenobi with a sudden burst of speed, attacking Kenobi with a vicious overhand strike aiming to cleave him in two. Kenobi easily blocked and began attacking Vader with the basic tenets of Shi-Cho and Ataru. Vader would realize that the master before him was fighting poorly, an academic master perhaps. Though, why a Guardian's blade, he wondered. No matter, he thought. He would die, same as the other masters. Vader then began to ramp up his attack speed and power to the point that Kenobi is forced to begin to incorporate some Srisu into his sequences to block. Vader noticed this change, but did not think much of it, as most Jedi knew basic Srisu by root. Kenobi did not want to reveal his final card so soon, however, and would lash out with a force push that would throw Vader back several feet, gaining him some maneuvering room. Vader would be surprised by the power behind Kenobi's attack. Perhaps not an academic, he wondered, possibly a consular with a comrade's blade. For this would explain the clear use of Nine-Man and the lack of precision from the Ataru and Shi-Cho attacks. Vader then allowed Kenobi to rush at him while he employed Srisu to keep Kenobi from touching him. I have his measure, both Kenobi and Vader thought simultaneously. Vader would then release a force wave that would send Kenobi flying into a pillar. Surprised by the ferocity and raw power behind the attack, Kenobi began picking up loose objects to the force and hurling them at his adversary in a desperate attempt to buy time. Vader would tank, deflect, or even redirect them back at Kenobi, who would proceed to dodge them. Now confident in his enemy's capabilities, Kenobi would adopt a Srisu opening stance and wait for Vader's next strike. Vader would notice this change, but while wary, was not overly concerned, as this Jedi hardly seemed to be a master swordsman. Confident, he began a dedicated offensive, incorporating Juyo into his sequences. In this mid-fight, I favor neither combatant, as while it is likely that Vader might overwhelm Kenobi with a force repulse, it is unlikely given that Vader preferred to use lightsaber combat in one-on-one matchups. Similarly, while Kenobi was more inclined to use force-based attacks, I don't see them as having any real impact on Vader due to the nature of his armor. Additionally, despite their beliefs, neither combatant would have nailed down the other's fighting style. Kenobi would still be employing some trickery in his swordplay, and Vader's hybridization technique would still not be fully utilized. More often than not, I see this fight as not ending in the middle, but instead moving to the late fight. Cut, thrust, jab, swing, repeat. Vader strikes at the weight of a speeder bus and the precision of a sniper, but yet not one strike came close to touching Kenobi. Furious with himself for failing to crush this inferior enemy, Vader activated his blade's dual-phase setting, lengthening the blade by almost half, and renewed his offensive. Kenobi would be thrown off guard, but only for a split second, and would then resume either dodging the heavy power blows, shunting aside the jabs, or blocking any swings thrown his way, all the while focusing on what Vader was neither paying attention to nor noticing: his cape. Kenobi risked a quick strike that dislodged one corner of the cape. The Vader made him pay for that maneuver in blood, smashing a hammer fist into Kenobi so hard that it lifted him off his feet and into a pile of boxes. Channeling the Force into healing his almost certainly fractured jaw, Kenobi looked at the Sith before him, noticing that the attack had successfully dislodged the cape, but the armor was only seared due to the light hit. No matter, he thought, that was not his target. As he used the Force to wrap the cape around Vader's helmet, blinding him, Vader threw everything into a leap back to safety on an outcropping. Vader would tear the cape from his helmet in enough time to see a flurry of rocks, machine parts, and branches headed his way. Vader would stand there, tanking every hit that touched him, in a clear use of Dune Mach, his armor more than capable of resisting this. With his eyes on the Jedi before him, Vader taunted his adversary. "You'll have to do better than that, weakling," he shouted. Kenobi was undeterred, as he knew from even before this attack began that it would fail, but then came to realize that his diversion had worked, and as such was able to finish the last healing burst to numb the pain, was almost ready to unleash his attack. Feigning fear in an attempt to lure the Sith into an attack, Kenobi took a step back and watched through his mind's eye while he centered himself. Vader leapt at his prey, only to be stopped by a perfect application of Surisu. This gave Vader pause. Up until now, the Jedi sword moves had been an application of multiple forms. He assumed that he was a Nemon specialist. But now, something had changed. The Jedi before him was using a textbook perfect application of Surisu, but yet, only Surisu. Sensing a trap, Vader began to leap away, only to be caught in a massive Force repulse that sent him flying through several stone pillars. Quickly jumping to his feet, Vader checked his suit's damage controls, noting that the breathing apparatus was slightly damaged, but not critically, so he locked his eyes on the Jedi, who was recovering from the massive exertion that had just used. Approaching more cautiously this time, Vader prepared himself for whatever the Jedi had in store next. While in the mid-fight, it would be equally likely that either candidate could take the victory. More often than not, the late fight is where I see this contest ending. By now, both combatants have sussed out each other's fighting style, and as such, would both begin to use every trick they had to defeat their enemy. Kenobi stood, calming himself. The repulse he had used had taken a lot out of him, and while he was not even close to fatigue, he certainly wasn't in fresh condition, and he could only hope that his enemy was in the same condition as he turned to face him. As Vader continued his walk towards the Jedi, he realized just how badly he had underestimated his adversary. He had initially assumed that the Jedi had been a novice at lightsaber combat, but yet, if that were true, how is it that he was still alive, and relatively injured no less? Vader decided that this was a worthy opponent, and began his sequences with Gem So, with a flawless integration of Makashi and Juyo. Kenobi picked up on this change in his opponent's technique, and slowly let himself slip into the currents of the living Force as his opponent ramped up the power and speed of his strikes. Vader was growing more frustrated by the second. With every strike, it seemed like the Jedi was just barely holding his ground. No matter how much harder or how much faster he committed his strikes, he could not seem to penetrate his opponent's defenses. Anger growing, he lashed out with a force push that sent objects hurling towards his opponent. Kenobi quickly calculated which of these objects would strike him, not in the position he was now, but the one he would be exactly 10.5 seconds. When the seconds had passed, he incinerated half of those with his blade while ducking behind his opponent, using him as a shield from the rest, all while scoring a light hit on his opponent's left shoulder as he leapt away from a vengeful counter strike. Vader was stunned. Not only had one of the most powerful offenses been incapable of breaking the Jedi, but he had used Vader's own strike against him. Vader turned to face his opponent, but something was wrong. While his body and legs moved, his left arm did not. Pulling up a display, he realized the Jedi had not missed his strike and had disabled his left arm. Activating backup controls, he manually stuck his arm in place at his side, and faced his opponent with a one-handed grip. Kenobi was inwardly thrilled at the result of his ploy, though not overly so, for while he had disabled an arm, his enemy could still draw on the Force in his other limbs. Realizing that he could not let the Sith bring his might to bear, he leapt at his opponent, forcing Vader to defend, and then suddenly Kenobi allowed him to begin an offense. Vader's hatred was monumental at this point, attacking the Jedi with everything he had, moving away from calm, collected Makashi and his perfected form to Gemso into pure Juyo, exactly as Kenobi had wanted. Kenobi knew from the beginning that he couldn't match the Sith in the Force, and when he discovered that his adversary had limited mobility, his plan had begun to take shape. Kenobi shielded himself behind an impenetrable wall of blue light as the Sith began an unrelenting, rage-filled Juyo assault. Kenobi waited patiently and allowed his opponent to go into higher and higher fits of rage, doubling his attack speed and quadrupling in power until he saw it. The Sith had made a fatal mistake of attacking from too high an angle to protect his knees. With a burst of speed that surprised even Kenobi, he rushed under his opponent, slicing off his knees at the joints. Vader snapped out of his rage and confusion. He had watched the Jedi blur by him and had begun to turn around, except he hadn't, and instead watched as his falling towards the temple floor and felt the slightest pain in his neck. And then he faded into blackness. Kenobi stared at the now headless body before him. He noticed something familiar about his opponent's lightsaber. Something about the design struck him as odd. It was quite familiar to a design he had. No, impossible, he thought, to use the Force to enhance his strength to tear off his opponent's mask and look at the face underneath it. Kenobi knelt down and wept. And thus I declare Obi-Wan Kenobi, the quintessential Jedi, the victor. Thank you all for watching the first installment of the first series of the Versus series. Keep in mind that this is all my opinion, and feel free to leave comments or suggestions for future matchups. I will see you all next time. This is the Phoenix Exalt signing out, and may the Force be with you always.